My son's family went to Disney while I had emergency surgery, using my credit card. I woke up, canceled the card mid-trip, changed my will, and disappeared when they got stranded in Orlando. I want to be clear about something before I start. I am not a dramatic person. I have never been a dramatic person. I grew up in a household where you didn't raise your voice, you didn't make scenes, and you certainly didn't air your grievances in public. My mother used to say that a woman who keeps her composure keeps her power, and I believed her. I still believe her. So when I tell you what I did, what I actually did in cold blood with full clarity of mind, I want you to understand that it wasn't a reaction, it wasn't a meltdown, it wasn't grief or medication or the confusion of a woman recovering from surgery. It was a decision made quietly at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold at my elbow, and it was the most deliberate thing I have ever done in my 71 years on this earth. My name is Barbara. I am 71 years old. I live alone in a house I have owned for 34 years, in a neighborhood where I know every family on the block and most of their dogs by name. I grow tomatoes in the summer. I do a crossword puzzle every morning before the news. I have a standing Wednesday lunch with my neighbor Helen that we have kept for going on 12 years without breaking. I tell you these things not because they are interesting, but because I want you to understand who I am before I tell you who I decided to become. I am a widow. My husband Robert died 11 years ago from a heart attack he never saw coming. He was 63 years old. He was mowing the lawn on a Sunday afternoon in September, and then he wasn't. I was in the kitchen making lemonade, and I heard the mower stop, and I thought nothing of it for several minutes. And then some shift in the quality of the silence, made me go to the window. I won't describe what I found. There are some things you carry privately, and that is one of mine. What I will tell you is that the 11 years since have been spent learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be a person who exists only in her own right, without another person at the center of her life. It is harder than it sounds. It is also, in its own way, a kind of freedom. I have one child, my son Daniel. He is 44 years old, and he is the person this story is about. And I want to be careful here because I do not want to paint him as a villain, even though what he did was villainous. He was not born a bad person. I know who he was as a child. I know who he was as a young man. I know the exact moment, somewhere in his mid-30s, when he stopped being the son I raised and started being someone I didn't quite recognize. I watched it happen, and I told myself it was just stress, just life, just the pressures of being a husband and a father in a world that asks a great deal of people. I made excuses for him the way mothers make excuses for their children long past the age when excuses serve anyone. That is on me. I own that. I want to say it plainly before this story goes any further. I allowed things to go on too long, and some of what happened is the direct result of my own unwillingness to see clearly. I don't say that to take responsibility for what he did. I say it because I think honesty requires that I account for my own part in how we got here. This is how we got here. Robert and I had Daniel when I was 27. We had been married 3 years by then, and were living in a small apartment on the east side of the city, the kind of place where the radiator banged all winter, and the upstairs neighbor kept a schedule that made no sense to anyone below. Robert was a machinist at a plant that made industrial components. Steady work, and he was proud of it. I was a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm. Between the two of us, we had enough, and enough was good. Daniel was an easy child in the truest sense. Not quiet or obedient, because he was neither, but loving him was easy. He had a quality of genuine warmth that drew people to him naturally, and he was funny in the sideways way where the joke landed before you knew to brace for it. He did well in school without trying very hard, which was both a gift and a problem, because it meant he never quite learned how to work for things. I noted that even then. He went to the state university on partial scholarship. Robert and I used most of our savings to cover the rest because we believed in him. He graduated in 4 years, got a job at a logistics company, and I remember standing in his first apartment watching him assemble a bookshelf and thinking that I had built this person. I felt very proud that day. I want to remember feeling that because it was real and it happened, whatever came after. He met Donna 4 years later. She was from a different city, sharp and ambitious, and I thought at the time, exactly the kind of woman who would keep my son on his toes in all the right ways. I wanted to like her. I tried very hard to like her. Looking back, I can identify the exact moment I understood what kind of dynamic we were going to have. It was their first Christmas dinner together, the year they were engaged. I had spent 2 days cooking. Robert's mother's pot roast, my mother's apple cake with the brown sugar glaze. Donna arrived, surveyed the table, and said pleasantly enough, "Oh, I actually don't eat red meat." She sat down, ate the side dishes, mentioned several times that she and Daniel were trying to eat clean, and never once said thank you for the meal. When she and Daniel left, she kissed my cheek and said, "Wonderful as always, Barbara." I washed the dishes and told myself I was being uncharitable. They got married the following October. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, $4,200. I gave them $5,000 as a wedding gift. I gave them the down payment on their house, $28,000, which was most of what I had left in savings after Robert's funeral and the years since. I did not lend it. I gave it. There is a difference. My grandson was born the spring after they bought the house. My granddaughter arrived 22 months later. I held both of them within hours of their arriving in the world and felt the particular love that grandchildren call up, enormous and uncomplicated, free of the anxiety that comes with being a parent. I loved those two children completely. I want that on the record. It was around this time that the babysitting arrangement began. Donna went back to work when my grandson was 4 months old, and what happened gradually was that I became the default solution for everything daycare didn't cover. Tuesday evenings, Thursday evenings, every other Friday, weekend mornings, school holidays, summer stretches. In the 3 years before what happened in March, I provided free childcare that, at minimum wage, would have been worth something something in the range of $30,000. I am not telling you this to complain. I loved being with those children. I am telling you this as context, as the record of a relationship that was always flowing in one direction. There were also loans. $6,000 when they were short 1 month, $4,500 for Donna's car repairs, $3,000 for a burst pipe. None of these were discussed after the initial ask. No repayment schedules, no timelines. The money left my account and entered their lives and stayed there. The total of documented cash by the spring of all this was $62,700. That number does not include the down payment. It does not include the car I gave them. It does not include the childcare. I looked at that number sometimes and felt nothing in particular about it because each individual transaction had felt right at the time. But I want you to have that number. It matters for what comes next. The thing about Donna is that she was never overtly cruel to me. She did not insult me or exclude me from family events. What she was, and I say this with as much clinical detachment as I can manage, was a person who had decided that I existed to be useful to her and who managed that relationship the way you manage a useful resource, with enough maintenance to keep it functional and not a great deal more. She would call on Saturday mornings with that particular flat warmth in her voice and say we were hoping you could take the kids today. Not asking. Hoping. Like it was already decided and she was giving me the courtesy of a heads up. If I said I had plans, she was perfectly pleasant about it. Of course, no problem. And then 2 days later, Daniel would call and mention, in a tone carefully calibrated to be non-accusatory, that the kids had really been looking forward to seeing me and Donna had been stressed and it would have meant a lot. He never said I should have said yes. He simply described the world as it would have looked if I had, and left the implication for me to carry. I recognized this technique. I understood that this was the way an account gets managed, not with demands, but with the steady application of emotional pressure that makes compliance feel like generosity and refusal feel like selfishness. I complied far more often than I refused. I told myself I wanted to. Most of the time, that was even true. Daniel occupied a particular position in the architecture of their marriage that I came to understand only gradually. He was not complicit in the way of someone who plans things. He was complicit in the way of someone who finds it easier to let arrangements continue than to question them, because questioning would require a confrontation he didn't want to have. He loved Donna. I believe that genuinely. He also managed his anxiety about the relationship by accommodating her preferences and values, and her worldview did not include the idea that gratitude was a verb requiring regular action. I watched all of this develop over the years and chose, again and again, to say nothing. Some of those choices were made out of love, some out of the specific maternal fear that telling your child the truth about his marriage will cost you the child, and I was not willing to pay that price. I told myself that as long as I was there for the grandchildren, I was doing what mattered. I told myself that right up until the Tuesday morning in March when I woke up on my kitchen floor. About 8 months before everything happened, I started noticing a pain in my lower right abdomen. It came and went. Some days a dull ache I could mostly ignore, other days something sharper. I put off the doctor for months, not because I was afraid of doctors in the abstract, but because I was tired in the long accumulated way of a woman who had been useful to everyone around her for decades and had not made particularly generous arrangements for being useful to herself. By February, the pain was worse. By the first week of March, I was taking over-the-counter pain medication twice a day and sleeping poorly. Helen told me at our Wednesday lunch to please go to the doctor. I said I would call that week. I didn't call that week. On a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of March, I woke at 5:30 and the pain was different, sharper, more localized, radiating in a way that told me this was not the manageable ache I'd been living with. I tried to get up and made it halfway before I had to stop and brace myself against the dresser. I called Daniel. He was my son. He was my emergency contact. He was, I still believed at that moment, the person who would come. He picked up on the 3rd ring. That detail matters to me. Not the 2nd ring, which would have been immediate, and not the 4th or 5th, which would have meant he had genuinely hesitated. The 3rd ring means he saw my name and decided, in some real-time calculation I will never fully understand, that picking up was the right answer, but that there was no urgency in it. Mom, what's up? Not fully awake, the half-alert voice of someone coming out of sleep into a morning they had not yet located themselves inside. I need you to come, I said. Something is wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital. A pause. What kind of wrong? I told him about the pain. I told him it had been going on for months and today was different. I told him I could not stand straight. He listened, or I believe he listened, because there was silence on his end of the line, and silence can be listening. And then he said, Mom, I'm supposed to be at work at 8. Can't you just call an ambulance? They'll take better care of you than I would anyway. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment, because I have sat with it many times since. They'll take better care of you than I would anyway. On the surface, it is reasonable. Paramedics are medically trained, and I am not, and there is a practical logic to it. But the sentence is doing other work, too. It is an argument for his absence framed as concern for my welfare. It is a way of saying I won't be there. That sounds like I want what's best for you. I didn't catch that fully in the moment because I was frightened and in pain, and I wanted a reason to believe it was all right. I said I was scared and I didn't want to be alone. He said he'd try to come when he could. He said to let him know how it went. I called 911. The paramedics were there in 12 minutes. They were young, both of them, late 20s at most, and they were kind in the practiced, efficient way of people who have learned to keep their compassion functional rather than sentimental. One held my hand while the other took vitals. My blood pressure was elevated. My temperature was up. When they pressed on my lower right side, I made a sound I am not proud of. They had me on the stretcher quickly. In the ambulance, I gave them Daniel's name and number as my emergency contact. I was already on the phone with him as we pulled away, telling him which hospital, asking him to please come. He said he was getting in the car right now. He said, "Don't worry, Mom." He said, "I love you." At the hospital, the CT scan results came back within 30 minutes of my arrival. My appendix was severely inflamed, on the verge of rupturing. If it burst, the infection could spread rapidly and become life-threatening. The doctor was direct in the way of someone who has delivered bad news often enough to do it clearly and without performance. "You need surgery now," she said. "We're going to take good care of you." I had never had surgery of any kind, not even minor procedures. The most I had experienced as a hospital patient was a broken wrist in my 40s, a cast, and 2 follow-up appointments. The idea of general anesthesia, of being unconscious and opened and put back together by strangers while I experienced none of it, felt enormous and incomprehensible in a way I couldn't get in front of. I lay on the gurney in the curtained bay and looked at the ceiling and tried to breathe steadily and think about nothing. Daniel arrived 40 minutes after I did, Donna behind him. He kissed my forehead. He asked the doctor the right questions about risks, about duration, about what the recovery would look like. Those were the right questions, and he asked them, and I want to credit him for that. Donna stood slightly behind him with her coat still on. She asked how long the actual procedure would take and noted the duration of observation the way you note a travel delay, as an inconvenience with a definite endpoint. She whispered something to Daniel. He nodded. Then he took my hand and looked at me and said, "Mom, we'll be here when you wake up. Everything's going to be fine." I went under, holding on to that. The surgery took 90 minutes. I don't remember any of it. That is the nature of general anesthesia, the clean erasure of time, the way you close your eyes in one moment and open them in another with no sensation of interval. I came back slowly, the way you come up through deep water. The recovery room was quiet and smelled of antiseptic. A nurse checked my vitals and I asked her if my son was in the waiting room. She came back with a careful expression, the kind you put on when the answer is something the other person won't want to hear. There was no one in the waiting room for me. I tried Daniel, voicemail. I tried Donna, voicemail. I sent a text, "I'm out of surgery, in recovery, where are you?" I watched the screen show it had been read. No response came. I told myself they had stepped out. I was still groggy from anesthesia, and the pain medication made everything soft-edged, and I let myself believe the benign explanation because it was available, and I was tired and frightened, and the alternative was something I could not fully look at yet. They did not come that night, or the next morning. I spent 2 nights in that room alone. The bed next to mine was occupied by an elderly woman whose daughter visited for most of the first day and evening, sitting in the vinyl chair, talking quietly, laughing occasionally at something on her phone. I tried not to watch them. I tried to read. I tried to sleep and couldn't sleep, and tried again. The second night, the neighboring bed was empty and the room was quieter than was comfortable. By the second morning, I had stopped constructing explanations. On the third day, the doctor cleared me to leave. I called a cab. Every pothole on the way home felt like a small specific punishment. I walked into my house and stood in my kitchen without turning on the lights. I stood there until my eyes adjusted and I could see the shape of everything. The chair where Robert used to read the paper, the bird feeder outside the window, the coffee mug I had washed before the ambulance came, still exactly where I had left it in the drying rack. 3 days later, and everything exactly as I'd left it, because no one had been here, because no one had checked. Then I went to my desk and opened my laptop. I opened my bank account the way I always did when I got home from being away. Routine, reflexive, the bookkeeper's habit of confirming the numbers are what they should be. I was not expecting anything unusual. The checking account had a balance of 208 TRs. It had held $6,400 on Tuesday morning. I clicked into the transaction history. The charges had started Wednesday, the day after my surgery. The day I was lying in that recovery room asking the nurse if my son was in the waiting room. Walt Disney World. Park tickets, 2 adults and 2 children, $2,340. The Grand Floridian Resort, the most expensive hotel at Disney World, the one that looks like a Victorian palace and has a view of Cinderella's castle. 2 nights at $1,390 each. Character dining, $340. A VIP guided tour, which I had to look up to understand, which is a private guide who takes your family through the park and bypasses every single line. $600 per person, 4 people. Gift shops, 3 of them. A restaurant with a view of the castle. A spa treatment at the resort. Photo packages. Things I did not recognize the names of that I understood to be the specific and expensive vocabulary of a place that has made an art form out of separating families from their money. Then I went to the credit card. The card I kept at a 0 balance for genuine emergencies. The one I had given Daniel the number for 7 months ago when his card declined on a school purchase and he said he would delete mine from the record after. It was maxed at its $15,000 limit. All of it Disney. All of it from Wednesday and Thursday. While I was alone in that hospital room, I sat at my desk and looked at those numbers for a while. I am not sure exactly how long. Here is what I did not do. I did not cry. I did not call Daniel. I did not spiral into the kind of grief that people might expect from a 71-year-old woman sitting alone in her house 3 days after surgery, looking at evidence that her son had spent nearly $20,000 of her money while she was in the hospital. I am not telling you this to present myself as impressively composed. I am telling you because I think the absence of that reaction was itself informative. It told me something about where I had been for a long time. The grief, if that is the right word, had been distributed across years of smaller realizations. There was nothing new to grieve. There was only accounting to do. I picked up the phone. Credit card company first. I told the representative I had been hospitalized for emergency surgery beginning on Tuesday, and that all charges from Wednesday onward had been made without my authorization. She was sympathetic and thorough. She noted that I had previously given this person my card information, which complicated the fraud classification, but she flagged the account for investigation and deactivated the card immediately. Any Any attempt to use it from that point forward would be declined. Then my bank. I told them I needed to close the checking account immediately and open a new one. The banker was efficient. Within 20 minutes, the old account was closed, a new one opened with a new number, automatic payments flagged for transfer. It was a Tuesday afternoon's worth of administrative work, and I was used to administrative work. Then Harold. Harold Brennan had handled Robert's estate 11 years ago, and I had stayed in touch with him in the low-maintenance way you stay in touch with a good attorney. Christmas cards, occasional calls, the awareness that he was there if I needed him. He answered his cell on the second ring, which told me he had seen my name and had not hesitated. He listened without interrupting while I told him everything. When I finished, there was a pause I read as thoughtful. "What do you need from me today?" he said. "I need to change my will completely. Daniel removed as beneficiary of everything. The house, the savings, the pension benefits, the life insurance, all of it. And I need it done today, Harold, not next week." He understood that I meant it. He told me to come to his office at 3 o'clock. In the hours between the phone calls and the meeting, I did something I had been doing in a small and private way for years. I documented. I had always kept records. The notebook in my desk had the running total of cash I had given Daniel and Donna since their marriage. I transferred those figures into a clean document on my computer, organized chronologically, pulled 12 years of bank statements and cross-referenced every transfer, printed the Disney charges from both accounts. Total documented cash, $62,700, not including the $28,000 down payment, not including the car, not including the childcare, just the money that had moved from my account to theirs over the course of their marriage. I looked at that number the same way I had looked at the bank statement, with sober recognition rather than shock. Then I put the folder in my bag and drove to Harold's office. He had drafted the new will with care. He walked me through it clause by clause. Everything to charity, split equally between the Children's Hospital 40 minutes north, the women's shelter 2 miles from my house, and the Animal Rescue Foundation I had been donating to for years. There were explicit provisions noting that this reflected my clear and considered wishes, and was not the result of diminished capacity or external pressure, which Harold had included on his own initiative and which I appreciated. I signed it. His 2 staff members witnessed. Harold had it notarized before I left. He walked me to my car and said quietly that he was sorry this was what the day had called for. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. I drove home with the signed will on the passenger seat and felt something I can only describe as clarity. The sensation of a room that has been cluttered for a very long time, suddenly and completely ordered. It was Thursday evening. They had booked the Grand Floridian through Sunday. They had no idea the cards were dead. They were probably at dinner right now, at the restaurant with the castle view, completely unaware that the vacation had already ended in every way that mattered. I made scrambled eggs and toast because my abdomen still ached and I didn't want anything complicated. I went to bed early. I slept better than I had in months. Daniel called once that evening around 7. I watched his name on the screen until the ringing stopped. His voicemail was bright and cheerful. They'd had an incredible day. Emma had been over the moon at the princess breakfast. Jake had ridden his first real roller coaster and wanted to go again immediately. No mention of the surgery. No mention of me except as an audience for the report of their excellent day. I deleted the voicemail and turned out the light. Friday morning, my phone was ringing before I had fully woken up. 6:47 a.m. Then again at 6:52. Then a text at 6:55. "Mom, the card isn't working at breakfast." Then, "Mom, this is urgent, please respond." Then Donna's number. She rarely called me directly. And then my son's again, and his tone had shifted with each successive call from irritated to something tighter and more vertiginous. The tone of a person whose understanding of their situation is changing rapidly and not in the direction they want. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table while it brewed and listened to my phone ring and buzz and ring again. Then I poured the coffee and sat down and read through every message in order. "Mom, the card got declined." "Mom, I called the company and they said the account was deactivated. Did you do this?" Then Donna. "Barbara, we have 2 small children here and this is not the time for this." Then Daniel, voice going high and uncertain. "Mom, both cards are gone. Whatever is happening, please call me." Then Donna. "Barbara, this borders on elder abuse and I will not hesitate to contact social services if you do not respond." I read that one twice. Then Daniel. "Mom, please. Emma is crying. We don't have enough on our own cards to cover the hotel checkout. We are stranded here." 22 missed calls, 41 text messages. I read every single one. I read them slowly, the way you read something you want to remember for a long time. Then I set the phone on the table and watched the birds at the feeder in the backyard. The sparrows were there. A cardinal had come, which was unusual for that early in the year. I watched the cardinal until it flew away. I did not answer a single message. The weekend that followed was, from my end, extremely quiet. I changed the locks Saturday morning. A locksmith came within 2 hours and replaced both front and back door locks and cut me 2 new keys, one for myself, one for Helen. I handed him the old key Daniel had kept on his key ring for 15 years, which he had used freely whenever he dropped the grandchildren off or picked them up. The locksmith held it for a moment and then set it aside. I spent Saturday afternoon going through my house methodically. There were things here that belonged to Daniel and his family. Toys the children left between visits, snow boots by the back door since January, a casserole dish I had lent Daniel 6 months ago and asked about twice without result. I put all of it in boxes and stacked them on the back porch. Then I went through the house once more and took stock of what was entirely mine. Helen came over Saturday evening with soup she had made and a look on her face that was part concern and part righteous indignation on my behalf. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened to everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you need me to do anything?" I told her about the new locks and the will and the cards. cards. She listened carefully, cataloging. Did you call the police? She asked. I thought about it, I said. I decided against it. She considered this. Is that because you don't want to, or because you're protecting him? It's mostly because what I've done is a more complete form of consequence than a police report would produce, I said. A police report creates a process I don't control. What I've done is permanent and complete, and I control all of it. Helen nodded. Before she left, she stood in my doorway and looked at me carefully and said, call me if you need anything. I told her I was all right. I meant it. The calls from Daniel and Donna slowed through Friday and Saturday. Apparently, Donna's parents had wired them enough to cover the hotel balance and get home, but not enough to finish the vacation. Daniel left a voicemail Saturday evening, his voice smaller and more uncertain than anything I had heard from him in a long time. He said he knew I was angry and that he understood and he really wanted to talk. He said he loved me. I deleted the voicemail. Sunday, I texted him. There is nothing to talk about. Do not come to the house. Then I blocked both numbers. Monday at 2:30, someone knocked at my front door. I looked through the people. Daniel and Donna, both grandchildren still in their coats, the little one holding her stuffed rabbit, all of them tired. Daniel looking like he hadn't slept. I stood at the door and did not open it. Mom, his voice careful, not demanding. Please just let me explain. I said nothing. Grandma, my granddaughter's voice, high and thin and uncertain. Are you mad at us? I stood on my side of the door with my hand flat against it. Daniel spoke for several minutes. Donna's voice eventually, threatening legal action, alienation of the grandchildren, social services, Daniel shushing her. They stayed 37 minutes. I watched the clock. Then I heard footsteps on the porch steps, car doors, the engine, then silence. I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. The weeks that followed were quieter than I had expected. The blocked numbers meant no calls, no texts, and the absence of them was not quite a relief. It was more like the end of a low-grade noise I had learned to live with for so long that I had stopped noticing it was constant. About 3 weeks after the surgery, well enough to sit at my desk for extended periods, I made an appointment with a financial advisor. Her name was Patricia. She had the manner of someone who has gotten very good at telling people uncomfortable things without making them feel small. I showed her everything. When she was done, she looked at me over her glasses and said, Mrs. Patterson, in the last 12 years, you have transferred approximately $62,700 in documented cash to your son and his family, in addition to the $28,000 down payment gift and an automobile. The total of those three things alone is over $100,000. I told her I was aware. She told me my financial position was more stable than I might expect. My house was paid off. My pension and Social Security income covered regular expenses without touching savings. The credit card investigation was ongoing, and I would likely recover most of the charges, though my out-of-pocket loss might reach $3,000 to $4,000. Manageable, she said? I said yes. She made recommendations about how to structure my remaining savings, careful adjustments a person can make when she is thinking entirely about her own future, without allocating anything toward other people's. I wrote them down. On the drive home, I thought about the number. Over $100,000. Each individual transaction had felt right at the time, and I don't believe in letting the accumulation of right decisions retroactively feel wrong, but it was useful to have the full number in front of me. It made something very clear. I was done being a resource, not done being generous. I still read to the preschoolers at the library, still brought soup to Helen when she had her knee procedure that summer, still donated to the charities I had donated to for years. I was done being useful to other people at the expense of being useful to myself, learning to carry that difference in my body rather than just understand it in my head. That was the work of that spring and summer. It was, in its own way, the most important work I had ever done. 4 months after the surgery, on a warm Tuesday afternoon in July, my doorbell rang at 3:30. I looked through the people. Daniel, alone. He was in a plain gray shirt and had lost weight he hadn't needed to lose, and his shoulders had the particular set of a person carrying something that had made itself at home. I thought about not opening the door. I ran through my reasoning, checked in with the part of myself that had made the decisions 4 months ago, and that I had come to trust more than I trusted sentiment. Then something in his posture, not the performance of misery, just the actual physical fact of what sustained grief does to a person's body, made me work the deadbolt. I kept the security chain on. What do you want, Daniel? He looked at me, then at the chain. He said, I'm not here to ask you to remove that. I just need to say some things, then say them. He looked at the floor, then back up. Tiffany and I are separating. She's filed for divorce. She took the kids to her parents' house 3 weeks ago. His voice was measured, like a man reading from a text he had memorized in order not to lose himself in it. I'm in therapy, twice a week. I started 2 weeks after we got home. I waited. I'm not here because Tiffany left, he said. I know that's what the pattern would predict, that I only show up when I need something. I know there's no reason you should believe me when I say it's not that. I'm here because my therapist asked me to think about the worst thing I've ever done, and I have been thinking about it for 2 months, and this is it. What I did to you in March is the worst thing I have ever done. I looked at his face. This face I had been looking at for 44 years in all its iterations. The baby, the boy, the young man, and now this. Someone reduced and honest in a way I had not seen from him before. I said, you haven't apologized once in 4 months. Not one apology. Not in the voicemails. Not when you drove here and knocked on the door. You've been angry and scared and desperate. You've never once said you were sorry. I know, he said. I've been working on understanding why. My therapist says I have a defensive pattern, that when I feel accused, I defend against the accusation instead of hearing the person beneath it. I left you alone in a hospital and used your money, and then I defended myself and drove to your door and told you my marriage was in trouble, and every one of those things was still about me. He stopped. You've been lying in that hospital bed this whole time, in my head, and I've been doing everything except sitting with that. I said nothing. everything. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you woke up. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I used your money. I'm sorry I called it the timing working out. I'm sorry for every loan I never paid back, and every time I let Donna make you feel like a convenience, and every time I laughed it off when you tried to tell me something was wrong. I'm sorry it took this, and I'm sorry that I only know how to be honest when the alternative gets too expensive." I stood on my side of the chain and let that sit for a long time. Then I said, "How are the children?" He blinked, like it surprised him. "They're okay." Confused. "Emma asks about you." I said, "When she's old enough, tell her something. Not the whole story, but enough. She should understand that people don't get to do what was done to me and call it love." He said he would. I said, "I need more time, Daniel." He nodded. "I'll wait," he said. "However long you need. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did, and that I'm trying to be different." I looked at him through the small gap the chain allowed. This person I had loved before he existed, who had been the center of my world for most of my life, who had done what he had done, and was standing here now, smaller than I remembered, telling me the truth. I said, "Goodbye, Daniel. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." He said, "I know you changed the will. I'm not going to fight that." I said, "I know you're not." He said, "Okay." He said he loved me. He turned and walked down the porch steps with his hands in his pockets, and I watched him through the peephole until his car was gone. Then I unhooked the chain and went to make tea. The fall was cooler than expected, which I liked. I had always liked autumn, the smell of it, the quality of the light, the way the garden settles in and gives up its summer ambitions. I spent a Saturday in late October pulling up the dead tomato plants and turning the soil, and it occurred to me with a physical clarity that was different from thought, something more like sensation, that I was happy. Not in the earning it way that requires sufficient processing and demonstrated growth, just happy. Standing in my garden on an October morning with dirty hands, alone and unobligated and fully in possession of my own life, I thought about Robert. I thought about what he would have made of all of this. I thought he would have been furious first, and then he would have been proud. He was not a man for dramatic gestures, but he had a deep respect for clarity, for knowing what you were owed and when clarity was denied, for removing yourself with dignity. He would have understood exactly what I had done. He would have made me a cup of tea and said quietly, "That's right, Barbara. I have had coffee with Daniel 4 times since July. Short visits, neutral locations. The first 2 were uncomfortable in the way of things that were once very familiar and are now strange. The third was better. He talked about his therapy, about the things he had come to understand about how he moved through his marriage and his relationship with me. I listened and did not offer absolution because that is not mine to offer. But I told him what I saw, which was someone trying, and I believed it. The 4th time he brought my grandson, who sat across from me in a diner booth and ate pie and talked about his soccer team with the unstoppable energy of an 8-year-old who is confident what he has to say is interesting, which it was. I asked questions, and he answered them at full volume and with enormous detail, and I thought, here, this is what I was protecting when I stayed, and this is what I was teaching when I left. I have not changed the will back. I will not change it. The decision was not made in anger and does not need to be revised now that the anger has passed, because it was never about anger. It was about clarity. The children's hospital and the women's shelter and the animal rescue will do more good with what I leave than any amount would do as an inheritance. I have told Daniel this. He said once that he understood it was fair. I said, it's not about fair. It's about what I want to do with what I built. It's the first time that's been fully mine to decide. He nodded. He said he understood. I believe he does. I believe he is understanding more things than he used to, and that the understanding is costing him something real, and that the cost is appropriate. I do not say that with satisfaction. I say it with something more complicated. The knowledge that growth is almost always expensive, and that the people who need it most are often the last to pay. My life now is small and full and entirely my own. I do my crossword every morning. I have lunch with Helen on Wednesdays, water aerobics twice a week, the library every Tuesday. I am growing garlic this year, which I have never done before, and I am told it requires patience but rewards it well. I am 71 years old. I had emergency surgery in March. My son stole from me while I was in the hospital, and I woke up and canceled the cards and changed the will and disappeared, and they got stranded in Orlando, and then I started over. I want to end with something I have been thinking about since the October morning in the garden. For most of my life, I used the word enough to describe what I had. We have enough. Enough is fine. Somewhere along the way, it got applied to me as a person. Barbara will be enough. Enough patient, enough generous, enough forgiving to absorb whatever the situation requires. I was enough all those years. I am still enough. But enough is also a limit, and a woman who has given enough has the right to say, that is where it ends. Everything on the other side of enough is mine. I made coffee that morning in March. I sat in the chair by the window where Robert used to sit. I read every single message they sent me from Orlando. I didn't answer one, and I have not been the same person since, in all the ways that matter.